I'm Stephanie from WorkSafe Tasmania. In recognition of the deep history and culture of this island, we acknowledge Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the original and continuing custodians of the land, sea and sky. We acknowledge and pay our respects to all Tasmanian Aboriginal people, all of whom have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to maintain their identity, culture and Aboriginal rights. Please now take a moment to read the following slide about information received today. Please use the chat window on your screen to type and submit questions for today's presenter. Those questions will be answered throughout today's webinar. Today's webinar is also being recorded, and we are also now sharing with you two handouts as well. So please head to your handouts tab to download those handouts. It is now my pleasure to introduce your presenter today from Cancer Council Tasmania, Sophie van der Clay. Sophie is a key member of Cancer Council Tasmania's prevention team, delivering its SunSmart program and working within the community to deliver education and information on all key areas of cancer prevention. Sophie has worked with workplaces including local councils to develop sun-safe policies and deliver staff education on reducing occupational and recreational exposure to UV. Sophie has a bachelor degree in nutrition science and has a keen interest in ways we can change environments, implement policy and work with communities to improve health outcomes, and we welcome Sophie today.
Thanks, Stephanie. And yes, welcome all to today's session. On behalf of Cancer Council Tasmania, I would also like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting today online, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Cancer Council Tasmania's mission is to reduce the incidence and impact of cancer on all Tasmanians, and we do this via a variety of services, including support, prevention and research and advocacy. All funds raised in Tasmania stay in Tasmania. We are a charity, and so we couldn't be doing the work that we do within the Tasmanian community without the support from the community itself. So you know that if you ever support Cancer Council Tasmania through any sort of fundraising events or other activities, you're helping the local Tasmanian community. So now we've just got a short little video that will explain in further a little bit more about the services we can provide.
Unlocking the answers to understand, prevent and treat cancer. We're improving the lives of those
Jumped halfway through, I think.
Leading Australia to a future without cancer. Every day, we're finding new and better ways to offer services, share knowledge, and bring hope to Australians everywhere. Because cancer affects us all. We're here to listen and care for people, however they need us, whenever they need us, through any type of cancer at any stage of the journey. Every day, we are supporting world-class researchers, empowering them to dream big and make the impossible possible. Together, we're pushing boundaries, unlocking the answers to understand, prevent and treat cancer. We're improving the lives of those living with it and even getting close to eliminating some cancers altogether. You may not see us, but we're here, in schools and people's homes, on the beach, at work and on the streets, helping millions of Australians cut their risk and detect cancer sooner. We know that 1 in 3 cancers can be avoided, so we're out there preventing as many as we can. You may not hear us, but our voice is loud. Every day, we're using it to advocate, change laws and drive policies. to reduce cancer risks and improve cancer care, to break ground and speak for the community in places where they're not always heard. Every day, we're closer to a future without cancer. And as a charity, we rely on Australia's biggest hearts to help us get there faster.
Perfect. So around 10 Tasmanians a day are diagnosed with cancer. So it is very common that if you are living in Tasmania, you either know of someone or you might have experienced a cancer journey yourself. But as the video mentioned, around 1/3 of all cancers can be prevented through certain lifestyle choices, which can also reduce the impact and incidence of other chronic diseases as well. This is just a bit of an outline for the session today. So first we'll be looking at big picture thinking. What is, in an ideal world, what would we like to see happen in and around UV in the workplace and managing those risks? And then secondly, we'll look at UV versus heat and temperature and why it's important we need to check what the UV is supposed to be daily. Thirdly, we'll look at how policies play a part in protecting workers from UV radiation. Then we'll go into the different sun protection measures to reduce skin cancer risk. And lastly, we'll wrap up with where to go for some more information and support. So our vision is that all employers and employees understand the risks associated with UV exposure, and strategies are in place to protect workers so that everyone can go home to their loved ones safe and healthy every single day. Everyone deserves to work in a place where their health and well-being matter. So today we're going to be looking at how we can work together to create an environment that will reduce your UV risk in the workplace. Outdoor workers receive 5 to 10 more times UV exposure than indoor workers. Roughly 200 melanomas and 34,000 other skin cancers every single year in Australia are caused by occupational exposures to UV radiation. Because of this increased exposure and risk, outdoor workers need to use sun protection all year round. So even in the cooler months during winter, you're still exposed to a greater amount of UV than the general population. So we do recommend that if you work outside, you're using sun protection every single day when you go to work. So now we'll just have a little quick poll in the chat. And so our question is, have you ever been sunburnt or tanned at work in the past 12 months? And so yeah, feel free to just pop your answers in. So I can see most of you have said no, and then there's a few yes. So that's also fun too. We're not here to shame or anything like that. So it's just great for us to sort of be aware of who might be at that greater exposure level. All right, I think that's all for the quiz. So what is UV radiation? Ultraviolet or UV radiation is a type of energy that's produced by the sun. Overexposure to UV radiation from the sun is the major cause of skin cancers. You can see the sun's light and you can feel the sun's heat, but you can't see or feel UV radiation. So we don't realize that it's actually damaging our skin until the damage has already been done. The UV index is a standard and useful measure scale, which tells us how strong the UV is and how to protect ourselves accordingly. So Cancer Council recommends that we use sun protection whenever the UV is 3 or above. So as soon as it starts getting into that moderate to higher levels of UV. However, as I mentioned before, we do recommend that outdoor workers use sun protection all year round. So here in Tassie, the UV is generally 3 and above from September through to April. So yeah, in those winter and autumn months, we are getting lower UV. So the general population, those who work indoors don't necessarily need to be using sun protection all year round, but outdoor workers, we do still recommend that they are remaining vigilant and using that sun protection. You can find out what the UV level information is for the day via our website or anywhere you can find the weather. So weather apps, your local newspaper, the Bureau of Meteorology website, or you can download the free SunSmart Global UV app, which has other helpful tips, tools and reminders in there as well. And the app will actually follow you based on your location. So if you are someone who travels a lot for work, or you might be in different locations of the state or even interstate or even international, it'll follow you wherever you go. So you'll know what the UV level is for your specific location and you can protect yourself accordingly to that. There are a variety of factors that affect UV, and we'll just briefly go through those now. So one of those is the time of the day. So the UV levels are greatest during the middle of the day when the sun is highest in the sky. So those sort of lunchtime periods where we might be off taking a break, it's really important that we are being extra vigilant during those as well. Time of year, so as I mentioned, throughout the country and through different times of the year, the UV level might change. And so here in Tassie, we do have that SunSmart season between September through to April for the general population. Cloud cover. So cloud cover can impact UV, but it has to be really heavy cloud cover. So that's often something that will catch a lot of people out. They'll say it's an overcast, cloudy day, I don't need my sun protection. But actually, the cloud needs to be really dense for it to have an impact on UV. You can still get a significant amount of UV damage on a cool, cloudy, overcast day as well. Reflectivity. So some surfaces can actually reflect UV, and so that's really important to think about when you're on different work sites and that sort of thing. So things like snow and some certain building materials, concrete in particular is a big one, and water. So water is a big reflector of UV. Proximity to the equator. So the closer you are to the equator, the higher the UV levels will be. And lastly, altitude. So people at higher altitudes are exposed to greater UV than those at sea level. So what is the relationship between temperature and UV sun damage? I did hint to it just before. So your risk is purely related to UV exposure and not temperature. UV levels can be damaging on cool, cloudy days and both warm, sunny days. So we need to be thinking about what is the UV rather than just relying on what the temperature is for the day. This graph on the screen just shows you how UV levels and temperature can be different throughout the day. So the green line shows the temperature across an average day, and we can see that it's sort of reaching its peak into the mid to late afternoon, where we're getting into those about 30-degree temperatures. The orange line is the bell curve, and so that shows the UV levels across the same day. So as I mentioned, the UV is highest during the middle of the day. And the blue line shows when the UV has reached 3. So we can see from the graph, we need to be using sun protection from around 9 till 2 is when the UV is 3 and above. And yeah, as I mentioned, so once we get to 2 o'clock, we probably, can ease off on the sun protection, but we still haven't reached that peak temperature for the day yet. So that just shows that UV and temperature are not related, and that, if we're relying on just the temperature to gauge whether we need to be using sun protection or not, we won't be adequately protected and we will be greatly exposed to UV. So to prioritise sun safety and comply with regulations while safeguarding workers' health, workplaces should take the following steps. So they need to show organisational commitment to sun safety. A lot of workplaces and policies only work from if the peak bodies or the management or whoever is sort of in charge of implementing those is also on board with the policy. The workers are not going to comply if they can see that the management and the top-down approach isn't happening. They need to implement a clear sun protection policy. This just ensures that you are covering all bases and that your workplace won't be liable for any sort of damage or exposure caused from being in the workplace. Provide easy to follow protection measures. So it's important to make it as simple as possible for the workers to ensure that there's a high level of implementation and efficacy and uptake for that policy and those protection measures. And also offering sufficient training, information and resources to help raise that awareness for the importance of it, because if they're more motivated, the employees will be more likely, as we know, to implement the policy themselves. So these actions will contribute to fostering a safer workplace culture, reducing UV exposure, and ultimately the risk of potential skin cancers in your workplace. So it is really important that employers are allowing as many opportunities as possible for their workers to be safe.
Thank you. So if your question has come through, are you able to
Yeah.
explain the difference between UVA and UVB and the different risks?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So UVA and UVB are just two different types of UV radiation from the sun. And so UVA, off the top of my head, is responsible for a lot of, that's the one that will cause your skin to darken, so tanning, you might get some other sort of pigmentation or freckling from the sun and wrinkles, so other signs of UV exposure, so not just the sunburn and the suntan, but those sorts of other visible signs of UV damage. UVB is the other sort of UV radiation that is more responsible for that longer term risk, so the development of skin cancer and other diseases as well, and so that's how they work. Generally speaking, it's obviously important to be aware of that there are different types of UV rays from the sun, but the protection measures for both are the same. And so when we talk about UV in a general sense, we're talking about both UVA and UVB. And once we get into the protection measures, I'll explain a little bit further about how certain things like sunscreen will address both of those sorts of UV rays.
Thanks.
So employees are responsible as well. So not all of the responsibility falls onto the workplace. We know that everyone is responsible for their own individual health. And so the employees are responsible for their own safety, but also the safety of those around them. So yeah, the whole peer-to-peer encouragement, and we're humans, we all follow the same sort of tendencies. If we see other people doing it, we're more likely to do it ourselves. And so the responsibilities of the employees typically include compliance with policies and procedures. So workers are expected to follow their employer's policies and procedures related to UV protection. This may include wearing appropriate protective clothing, using sunscreen or seeking shade when necessary. Participating in training, so workers should participate in any UV awareness or protection training provided by their employer. This training can help them better understand the risks associated with UV exposure and how to best mitigate them. Using personal protective equipment, so workers should wear PPE, such as UV protective clothing, hats, sunglasses, and ensure their PPE is in good condition and report any issues with their supervisor. So we often like to say that UV protective measures and clothing and sunscreen are just like any sort of other PPE. We wouldn't be walking onto a work site in our thongs. We wouldn't weld without a mask. And just like if we're working outdoors, we shouldn't be out there without our sun protection. Seeking medical advice. So workers should promptly report any signs of sunburn or sun damage to their supervisor that they receive while in the workplace and seek medical advice if necessary. Early detection and treatment of UV-related health issues are important, so it's also great if workplaces can allow for their employees to go and get things like skin checks or get moles checked out if they need to in work times, just to greater allow that access and ability to be able to get on top of things early and find cancer early. Employees should also use safe work practices, so such as taking breaks in shade, staying hydrated, and minimizing direct sun exposure during UV peak times if possible. And lastly, reporting hazards. So if a worker identifies any sort of hazard related to UV exposure in the workplace, they should report this to their supervisor straight away or their health and safety representative. All right, so that jumps into where we'll talk a little bit about UV protection policies for workplaces. So Cancer Council Tasmania is here to assist workplaces to review or develop new or existing sun protection policies for workplaces. And so we can look at what strategies are already in place, identify any gaps, and offer any practical solutions or support where necessary. So we do just have another quick poll here that we'd like to ask. So does your workplace have a UV safety policy currently in place? So that's just yes, no, or if you don't know, just tick I don't know. Awesome. So yeah, we can see about 50% do, so that's great. That's great news. About 37% don't, and 20% not sure. So that's completely fine. Feel free to reach out post-session if you want some more information about WorkSafe UV policies, or if you do have a policy and you want us to just run our eyes over it and make sure that there aren't any gaps or changes in the evidence or information or recommendations, feel free to reach out as well. So I won't go too much into detail about the different ins and outs of a policy because that can get very dry very quickly. And so the main parts of the policy are just explaining the importance of having a policy, why it's important, and why your workplace in particular has decided to implement a policy, the aims of the policy, so what is the purpose of the policy, and then it goes into the specific sorts of measures and protective factors for the policy. So that's what we'll jump into next to talk about what are those measures that we can implement in the workplace to reduce the risk of UV exposure. And then it also can include other various links to more resources or information or other specific workplace or organisational sort of factors. So like I mentioned before, if your workplace allows staff to go for skin checks in work time or that sort of thing, that can also be all included in the UV policy for the workplace. So now we've just got another quick little video that will introduce us to the different sun protection measures.
Looking after your skin is as easy as it sounds. Slip into protective clothing, seek shade, slide on your sunglasses. uvdaily.com.au.
Sorry, I just realised I was on mute. So just as I was saying, you wouldn't enter a work site without your hard hat or steel cap boots. You wouldn't go outside and work outside without sun protection. So that should also be included as a regular part of your PPE. So firstly, our first measure is to slip on protective clothing. So protective clothing is one of the best forms of sun protection. The more skin that is covered, the better. So choosing things with long sleeves or longer pants is, a sure way to ensure that you are minimizing your risk of UV exposure in the workplace. You can wear loose fitting shirts with a collar or long sleeves or long trousers made from a UPF 50 plus material. So a lot of workwear in particular will have a swing tag on it with a UPF factor. And so looking for that UPF 50 plus. The UPF works very similar to SPF with sunscreen. So the greater the UPF, the greater the protective factor. Different materials provide a lot more protection than others, so it depends on like the knit of the material, the fabric, even color can play an impact too. So looking for that swing tag if possible, but any clothing is better than none. Choosing breathable fabrics as well. So as I mentioned, fabric can impact the protective factor, but obviously if you're outside in the sun, you want it to be breathable, so it's a little bit cooler. So things like cotton allow for good ventilation. You can also wear gloves to protect the back of your hands if that works in your line of work. Next is sunscreen. So we want to slot on sunscreen. When sunscreen is applied and reapplied correctly, sunscreen provides effective sun protection. However, sunscreen shouldn't be relied on as the only form of sun protection. So sunscreen should be the last line of defense. We should be using all of the other methods of sun protection first and then using our sunscreen on the areas where those don't cover. So we want to apply SPF 50 or 50 plus broad spectrum water resistant sunscreen. So that broad spectrum is what we were talking about earlier with the UVA and the UVB. So you know that if your sunscreen is broad spectrum, that just is a fancy way to say that it is covering all of the UV rays and that you're protecting yourself from all of those different sorts of risks. We want to reapply our sunscreen every 2 hours or more frequently if we're sweating or swimming or if you've been towel drying yourself as well. You can try different non-greasy formulas, so you can keep a grip on your tools, or there are certain dry touch work formulas that work great if you work in dusty environments and that sort of thing. So you're not having that stick to you. Keeping sunscreen in a cool, dry place as well is really important because if it starts to heat up, then it just doesn't work as effectively as well. So keeping it in places like your lunch cooler, if you've got one of those on site, or anywhere where it can be stored below 30 degrees is recommended. And it's also important to check the expiry date on sunscreen. So a lot of people don't actually realise that sunscreen has an expiry date. And so similar to food that has a use by date, we wouldn't be drinking milk that's like a couple of weeks out of date, if not a couple of years. So same with our sunscreen. It doesn't provide that same sort of protection once it passes that expiry date. And so, it's important to check those expiry dates. If you've got expired sunscreen, we do recommend, as much as it sucks, to just bin it because it's no longer effective. We don't necessarily know what the makeup and the chemicals in the product will do after that expiry date to your skin, and so it's just best to remove that completely and start fresh.
Thanks, Sophie. Are you able to talk a bit about zinc and how often that needs to be reapplied?
Zinc. So zinc is very similar to sunscreen, so it's just a different sort of sunscreen, and so it's zinc. So there's different types of sunscreen makeup. So we've got chemical sunscreen, which is what the most common sunscreen is on the market. So your general sunscreen that you buy from the chemist or the supermarket, that is what we call a chemical sunscreen. There are things like zinc based products as well. And so we would still recommend that that would be reapplied every 2 hours or more frequently if you've been swimming, sweating or towel drying as well. Some people just prefer different types of sunscreen to others, and so that's just a personal preference, but we do say that the recommendations are the same. Perfect.
And just a question in respect to clothing. How long does the UV protection last?
That's a really good question, and one that I probably don't have a definitive answer to, because it depends on the wear and tear of the garment, and so it also depends on what you're doing in your workplace. And so generally we would recommend maybe annually or more frequently replacing those sorts of your clothing, your tops and that sort of thing, but more frequent if you're noticing things like holes or if the material is getting thinner, because then obviously the UV protection in that clothing is reducing significantly. And so that's all very dependent on what's happening, what work you're in, and initially what the fabric is as well. Perfect. So we might move on to hats. So slapping on a hat, we do recommend broad-brimmed bucket or Legionnaire style hats. These provide the best protection. So trying to avoid things like caps and visors, because they just leave your nose, your cheeks, your chin, your neck and your ears all unprotected from the sun. And these are very common sites for cancer, for skin cancers. So looking for that broad brim bucket or Legionnaire style hats. If you're required to wear a hard hat or similar in your line of work, you can attach different sorts of wide brims or neck flaps to those that can improve the level of sun protection that can provide. And so we would greatly recommend that if you are required to wear hard hat or other sort of protective headwear. Next, shade. So seeking shade, if you're fortunate enough to have shade in your workplace, make use of it wherever you can, including during breaks. So we understand that shade, you can't always be in the shade, especially in work, and so taking breaks whenever possible in the shade and just using that, taking 5 minutes here and there if possible, just to remove yourself from that UV exposure completely, will make a significant amount of difference. So form can be in the shade can be in the form of either permanent shade, so this could be like built structures, buildings, portable shades such as gazebos, or natural shade like trees and other plants. Whatever you use, make sure it casts a dark shadow, and just remember that UV can reflect off certain surfaces. So things like soil and clay actually reflect more UV than grass. And so it's important that even if you are in the shade, have a look at your surroundings and make sure that that UV isn't then going to be bouncing off and still getting you directly from underneath, from that reflective surface. And so that's why it's also important that if you are still in the shade, to be using those other sorts of sun protection measures to reduce that if there is that reflectivity happening around you. And lastly, sliding on sunglasses. So we want to wear sunglasses that meet Australian standards. And so similar to the clothing, most sunglasses will have a little swing tag or a sticker on them that will say whether or not they meet Australian standards. And if they don't, you want to look for ones that are either in category 2, 3, or a 4, or with an EPF factor of 9 or 10. And so just keeping your eye out for that, because there are a few sunglasses on the market that are more fashion statements than actually providing that sort of protective factor from UV. And so it is really important that we are looking for those sorts of information when we're buying and purchasing our sunglasses. We want to look for glasses that fit close to your face and provide protection from the sides in the form of a wraparound design, if possible, or have side shields. These reduce UV radiation from reaching the eyes around the edge or the top of your glasses. And so skin cancer can actually appear obviously on your eyelids and around your eyes, but also on your actual eye itself. You can still get things like melanoma pop up on your actual eyeball itself. And so that's why sunglasses are a really important strategy when trying to minimize that UV damage. You can also purchase safety glasses with UV protection in them. So these can be clear or tinted, and they provide the same benefits of both UV protection and that impact protection factor if you are required to wear these as well in the workplace. Some other strategies to keep in mind when talking about sun protection in the workplace is around planning. So plan work so that outdoor tasks are scheduled either earlier in the morning or later in the afternoon if possible to avoid that peak UV period across the middle of the day. You could consider window tinting for side windows of vehicles to help reduce UV, so that can be an effective strategy for truck drivers or other people that are on the road quite frequently. Downloading the SunSmart app is also really important, and just getting in the habit of checking that every single day. You can set it up so it'll send you an alert in the morning to let you know what the UV is going to be for your particular region and what the recommended sun protection times are so that you can be extra vigilant. We've got a note about seasonal workers. I'm not sure if there's any on the line here today, but to fit within work health and safety, like you would expect enclosed footwear on farms or hard hats on work sites, you should be asking your workers to comply with workplace standards and UV protection clothing where possible. So even for those seasonal workers, it's still really important that they are still using that sun protection methods as well. In particular around berry growing and other produce. And if you've got polytunnels around, some of these polytunnels can offer UV resistance. So if they've got a UV resistant film, however, this isn't always the case, and it would differ between whatever products are used. And so it's really important that if you're working in this sort of environment, you are still protecting yourself by using these 5 factors, rather than just relying on certain materials that may or may not be providing you that with that extra protection. I guess before we just move on, I wanted to check if there were any other questions in and around these protective factors. Nope. All right.
No questions coming through.
No worries, we'll move on. So although prevention is ideal, it's really important that we are trying to find cancer early. So majority of skin cancers can be treated successfully if they are found early. And so annual skin checks and regular self-checking are both vital tools to detect any suspicious spots. It's important to get to know your own skin and what's normal for you, so any unusual changes can be found early. We need to look for any change in shape, size, colour, or the development of a new spot on our skin. And if we notice any of these changes, we should go and contact our doctor straight away. When we're self-checking our own skin, it's crucial that we check all of our skin, not just the sun-exposed areas, because in particular melanomas can appear in areas that have never been exposed to the sun or have rarely been exposed to the sun. And so it's important that we're checking our full body and asking a family member or a trusted friend and using things like mirrors to check those harder to reach places as well. And this is just a little self-prompt and you don't need to answer, but when was the last time you checked your skin or went to the doctor for a skin check? We like to ask this question because a lot of people struggle to remember. And so if you're one of those that struggles to remember, we would encourage you to, maybe book in that appointment or, self-check your own body because, just to get into the habit of that, it can take 10 minutes every couple of months and it could save your life. So it's really important that, we're trying to find cancer early as well. So Cancer Council Tasmania offers a 20% discount on all orders over $200. So if you're looking at stocking your workforce with sunscreen or other sun protective equipment, please feel free to reach out to me after the session, or you can give us a call on our main number, which I'll show on our final slide, if you would be interested in taking advantage of this discount. Also, just would like to mention that if you work outdoors, you can also claim tax deductions for sun protection. So hats, sunglasses, clothing, sunscreen, you can claim that back on your tax at the end of the financial year. So that's also something that a lot of people aren't quite aware of. And so that can be a really good incentive too, to make sure that you're fully stocked up and protecting yourself when in the workplace. So this is just also the last opportunity to ask any questions, comments. If you'd like more information on anything we have talked about today, I'll leave that open just for a little bit. Feel free to pop those in the chat and we can have a look at those.
And thank you, Sophie, for your presentation today. So our presenter today is Sophie van der Klee from Cancer Council Tasmania, and her webinar is Managing the Risk of UV Exposure in the Workplace. So if anyone does have any questions for Sophie, there is still time to use the chat to type those questions.
Thanks, Stephanie. And this is just our last slide. So this is my email address and our number that you can call if you want more information, or if you want help or support in implementing a UV policy in your workplace, or if you've got an existing policy and would like us to just have a quick glance over it, feel free to reach out as well.
All right, thanks, Sophie. A question, how much worse is our UV exposure in Tasmania? So does UV differ between states in Australia?
So UV does differ between states in Australia. More so, a lot of people here in Tassie think that the UV is worse, that it's more intense, that the hole in the ozone layer can play an impact. But in actual fact, that's not the case. And so here in Tassie, we are lucky in a sense that we have a sun smart season. So the UV is 3 or above from September through to April. But that can also catch people out. So as we were talking about with temperature, we're in early October now and the temperatures are still relatively cool, but people then get caught out and they're not using their sun protection because the weather hasn't warmed up yet, and they come back home and they're burnt or they've experienced some sort of sign of UV damage, and they assume that the UV is worse, but they're actually just caught out because of that link between UV and temperature. Other states in Australia, so places like Queensland, as I was mentioning, they're closer to the equator, and so the UV is on average above 3 all year round, and so they don't have that season. They need to be using, even the general population should be using sun protection all year round. They don't have that sort of sun smart season like we do here in Tassie. And so, yeah, that's just another thing to keep in mind. But it's more around that temperature and UV and busting that myth that they're not related, and to be, yeah, checking the UV every single day to see what it is.
Thanks, Sophie. A question has come through around or comment around replacement lenses after cataract surgery, and they can either be UV or non-UV. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and whether there needs to, be a question at the time to ask for UV lenses?
That's a really good point, and I've actually never well, in my time working at Cancer Council, I haven't been super familiar with the ins and outs of cataract surgery following and what the replacement lenses are, and so that's a really good point. I think if the option is there for a UV replacement lens, then that's obviously a great point, but keeping up the use of things like sunglasses in particular to minimize that exposure even after surgery is also really important. But that's something that I can have a look at into as well post-session. And if you'd like more information, I can reach out directly as well.
Thanks, Sophie. And just a reminder to everyone, if they haven't already downloaded the handouts that have been provided, please head to the handout tab to download those handouts.
Yeah, so those handouts, one of those is a sample sun protection policies. So that's really useful for those that who may not have a sun protection policy in place in their workplace or aren't sure. That's just a little bit of an example of what we would include in one. So we can work with you on developing that specifically for your workplace if you are interested. And then the other handout is just a little bit of a summary about the information that we have talked about today. And so if you would like more information for your workplace to help raise awareness, yeah, feel free to reach out as well post-session, and I can put you in touch with some more similar resources.
All right, thank you, Sophie. And on that note, we'll begin to wrap up today's webinar. So your presenter has been Sophie van der Clay from Cancer Council Tasmania, and the presentation is Managing the Risk of UV Exposure in the Workplace. Today's webinar has been run as part of WorkSafe Tasmania Month. WorkSafe Month is a long-running initiative that is funded by the WorkCover Board Tasmania. Today's webinar has been recorded. Please head to WorkSafe Tasmania's YouTube page to review and rewatch today's webinar, or have a look at other webinars that we are running during WorkSafe Tasmania Month. To register for more online and in-person events running around Tasmania throughout the month of October, please head to worksafe.tas.gov.au. Thank you again to our presenter. Thank you for everyone for attending, and please have a safe and healthy rest of the day. Thank you.